My name is Steve Davis, and I'm the CEO at Anglo International Shipping, a UK dry bulk ship owner. And I'm also part of the London International Shipping Week working group this year. The overarching theme of this year's Shipping Week is driving growth in a disrupted world. And participants have been asked in a series of talks in the lead up to September to share thoughts on how we as an industry shape the way we increase the scale of what we're doing when looking ahead, i.e., how are we achieving and driving growth. The sub-themes of ESG will certainly be an important driver of the discussions throughout Shipping Week. And I'm sure they'll focus to the challenges and perhaps to the failures of our industry. But I also hope they'll be reminders of the successes and the opportunities. There'll certainly be some vocal speakers providing their views on the more problematic issues, where the ownership of those issues should lie, some of the obstacles to meaningful progress, and let's all hope for some practical solutions that we can take away. The challenge of decarbonisation, undoubtedly the key issue of the E of ESG, is likely to continue to dominate the agenda. Shipping is on the path to decarbonisation, that's clear, but the solutions are not, and we're therefore seeing significant dialogue focused on this issue. But that's not what I intend to talk about today. Personally, I've spent a lot of time focusing on governance in the setup of Anglo, the G of ESG. I've been listening to the expectations and requirements of our capital market providers, regulators and stakeholders, particularly our team, to try to improve on what has come before and drive change where perception of standards has required lifting. Generally, shipping is on the path to improved governance. I do believe that. But to a large extent, the solutions there are clear, even if in some instances they aren't implemented. But again, that's not what I intend to talk about today. Sandwiched between the E and the G is the S, social. I'm privileged to have been asked to be the moderator for the social panel at the coming Shipping Week headline conference. And in preparation for that, I've been polling views on the key issues in this area. And I'm finding that the vast majority of people in our industry will turn quickly to crew and crew well-being when asked about social. And it's a critical part of the discussion for sure. We've certainly seen an inexcusable situation related to welfare and well-being of the 1.7 million seafarers serving on board vessels around the globe. I do look forward to hearing panelists' thoughts on that front, and I think that all maritime professionals should be using their respective platforms to support the call for action on the current crew change crisis at every opportunity. That is exactly what it is, a crisis. But it would be to a fault if the debate on social aspects stopped there. I'm surprised to find that apparently few people perhaps appreciate the sleeping giant that is social. And I should highlight that the most attuned to this issue appear to me to be the charterers. The rise of social enterprise is not a new paradigm, but perhaps the real thrust of social as part of the ESG mix needs a slight reset in some of our minds, needs us to give a bit more thought not only to whether a better understanding of social factors could be the most significant and meaningful catalyst, but also the meaningful solution, not only for driving growth, but for driving better growth for our industry. I think without doubt we're in a disrupted world. And in that respect, our industry is facing its own share of disruption. But let's face it, to a large extent, the disruption that is dominating the agenda was coming, COVID pandemic or not. So what is it about the COVID pandemic that makes it seem so different now? That makes the idea of a disrupted world such a key part of the London Shipping Week conference? Is the environment suddenly now more important? I would argue not. Have standards of governance been thrown more into question? To some extent, perhaps, but action in those areas has been underway for some time. So why does the groundswell around ESG feel like it's been lifted to a new level during the COVID pandemic? And the answer for me is that a complex combination of political, economic, and social drivers have each faced significant additional disruption themselves as a result of the COVID pandemic. And for me, that's where it gets interesting. I don't intend to focus on the political or economic highlights, but social, as one of Shipping Week's sub-themes, is currently stepping up its prevalence in the ESG mix. As we look to shape growth and recovery, my intention is to share some thoughts on that subject. We talk about culture a lot in business. What is your corporate culture? We're often asked. Well, if there's an effective answer to that question, it's the shared social values of our stakeholders. On a larger scale, we look at the shared social values of our industry, our nations, and beyond that, our planet. And this, in short, drives everything, including political and economic thinking, and to a large extent, thinking on the other sub-themes of environment and governance. Significant disruption and challenges have been building and are building in respect of demographics and urbanization, poverty, inequality, be that financial inequality, gender, race, religion, orientation, or any other, nationalism, the role of government, and ethical consumerism. These are significant social issues and trends. And the underlying social drivers are the biggest cause of a disrupted world. My sense is that the COVID pandemic has acted as a catalyst in a number of these areas. We can see the significant political, economic, and health challenges being faced around the globe, even if we're the fortunate ones not having to live them. But I think the majority of us can feel the social disruption building, and this could signify a significant shift in the way we value markets in the future. At least that's my hope, as there are opportunities to affect positive change and generate business value in that respect. Changes across this broad spectrum as we drive growth are and are going to be increasingly challenging. As mentioned, these issues have certainly been amplified by the global pandemic in my mind, but they've still got a long way to go in terms of playing out. I would argue that disruption is coming more from social factors than anything else. So let's consider E and G with S firmly in mind and have a more meaningful debate on the social factors facing our industry. Tackling the social challenges should be as high on the agenda as anything else. So what about growth? Is growth what we need, and is growth what we want? Well, in dry bulk, the question, I suppose, is moot. Want it or not, growth is coming. With the increase in global population comes an increased need to house, power, feed and clothe and provide economic opportunity for more people. The broad array of dry bulk cargoes underpin that. And one can do little to change the geographic locations of the producers and the end users. Even in the initial height of the pandemic, from say March 2020 to March 2021, dry bulk demand grew by 4%, equivalent to the long-term average trend, and today shows little sign of slowing. So the main focus on the premise of London International Shipping Week for dry bulk protagonists, at least, therefore becomes about preparing for that growth, simply. And as suggested, considering how to steer businesses successfully through it with ESG challenges in mind. The dry bulk sector consists of around 12,000 vessels, representing about 45% of the global carrying capacity. And we transport around 5 billion tons of cargo per year. With few exceptions, that fleet is primarily powered by fossil fuels, carrying cargoes used in large-scale industrial production, power generation, food production and distribution, and advanced manufacturing. So increasing demand seems at this stage to be intrinsically linked to an inevitable increase in emissions in the near term. So is that a bad thing? Well, it's not a good thing. But as things stand, the technology and infrastructure for deep-sea shipping isn't there to set out a clear path to decarbonisation. And an increase in demand for the commodities logically requires an increase in vessels to transport the end goods. Interestingly, the key driver behind the environmental concern is itself a social driver, and one that's at odds with a number of other social drivers. Climate change creates a risk to our collective health and well-being and has the potential to significantly impact the physiology of our planet. And it's the shared social values that we all have that have driven this issue to the top of the agenda at a national and international level. It shapes both political and economic thinking. But there is a juxtaposition existing here. Social drivers also call for growth. Growth in global trade, growth in commodity demands, and therefore growth in shipping. The UN Sustainable Development Goals bring together the key objectives to be tackled at an international level, the shared values that are derived from the representatives of the nations involved. And of those values, tackling climate change is one, i.e. the environment. Building effective and accountable and inclusive institutions is part of another, i.e. governance. But there are 17 Sustainable Development Goals in total, and these goals go to tackling some of the other biggest social challenges immediately facing the world. Poverty, hunger, inequality, gender equality, affordable and clean energy, and responsible consumption and production. These are important social objectives. And I'd like to share with you a few quotes in this respect. So former UN Secretary General Ban Ki-moon: "Tackling growing inequality in rich and poor countries alike has become a defining challenge of our times." The World Economic Forum: "Income inequality is the number one global risk." With those in mind, a few more quotes. This one from the UN: "Trade, not aid, is the single biggest driver of access to critical goods and services, from power to water and food and education. Trade, enterprise, and business are by far the most critical drivers of local opportunity and global prosperity, and must be at the heart of plans." An EU study points out that the private sector provides 90% of jobs in developing countries. And the World Bank notes that in many developing economies, export growth has been associated with greater gender equality. So growth is good. Growth is needed if we're able to achieve these objectives, and supporting these social objectives through our industry is a noble cause. There are immediate global tragedies on the horizon that require us as an industry to continue to do what we're doing, but find ways to do it better. So supporting growth whilst ingraining social purpose, as well as environment and governance, is just as important. My view on this, as you might be able to tell, is that given shipping is a critical and significant part of global trade, it therefore drives an incredible, almost unquantifiable level of positive social change. And for all the areas where it needs improvement to align with a number of Sustainable Development Goals and our own values elsewhere, we should be proud to be part of that effort. So if social drivers do drive everything, then why are the solutions often unclear? And why do we find ourselves trying to fix rather than prevent? We have one of the best examples of a free market there is in shipping. So why does the market not facilitate faster solutions to our ESG challenges? Surely the collective social values should drive our markets. They are, after all, an institutional arrangement intended to help society meet its objectives. Well, unfortunately, I support the view that markets are imperfect, and in the absence of any other single unifying view on social capital, or a simple way to convey social capital into a market, financial value and cost almost always prevail. Markets more naturally facilitate trade basis low cost. It's a subjective value. It doesn't always go to a high social or moral value. The idea that the market is always right seems to have become the prevailing view in the most influential economies, at least, with controls on social contracts somewhat relaxed. And the problem there is the market participants are unfortunately irrational. For our industry's market or markets to work effectively, there must be not only trust and integrity, but to achieve these long-term social objectives, perfect rationality. When I look at our business alone, I feel it's my duty to maximize our profits whilst conforming to law and to the social values of the market participants and our stakeholders. So understanding those social values is critical. As Friedman states, social capital is key to the market. But externalities over which we have little individual control cause market imperfections. The climate crisis, for example. Most of us tend to time and situation-specific focuses in our decision-making, focusing more on the present than the future, placing more value on satisfaction now than security tomorrow. And so we circle back to having to control the markets. The market's imperfect. So for meaningful progress to be made on ESG objectives, the voices of our industry call for collaborative international regulation and frameworks. And that's easier said than done, I appreciate it. But to put it perhaps in a way that most shipping participants will understand, we need the certainty of a long-term time charter, not the volatility of the spot market, to help tackle this complex set of issues. We as business leaders need those inputs to effectively find the market hand solution. These controls can shape environmental and governance mandates, but in essence, they will represent the significant disruption to the role of social capital. And that cannot be at the absolute cost of other critical social dilemmas. But it is important that social capital, social value, is injected back into the market through these mechanisms. As I see it across capital markets, charterers, owners, employees, suppliers, almost everyone along the chain would like to know that what they're doing is driving positive social change in a sustainable way. And I have to believe that that's the long-term trend that will help shape our future markets. But today, looking at shipping solely through the lens of its current use of or transportation of fossil fuels is to do it a disservice. The wider challenges related to the Sustainable Development Goals are interconnected and a result of a complex global system. Driving growth for us as shipping professionals isn't and shouldn't be simply about blindly achieving growth. It's about challenging ourselves on how we're steering our businesses on the road ahead. And hopefully, without taking the metaphor too far, it's about following the road signs, listening to our fellow passengers along the way. Those passengers are individually and collectively telling us something about their social values, about where they want to go and how that's evolving. And it's not backseat driving, it's important route planning. The social capital they contribute to our industry and their expectations of social contracts are the big picture that we have to keep in mind. And this won't be new news to many, but for those who tend to the thinking that the remit of the social debate is quite narrow, I hope this has helped to challenge the thinking. Because for an informed and logical debate on the environment and governance and any other area of our industry, as well as any area of our individual business planning, an appreciation of the full scope of S is critical. Adam Smith noted moral sentiments are learned and passed on basis the values of the day. And I think the one positive of the increased disruptions we find ourselves faced with today is that if social values are seeing a significant disruption, we as business leaders should see the opportunity. We'd better take note and drive growth accordingly, because resistance is not only futile, but it's arguably immoral. I look forward to exploring these social drivers in respect of growth further with the panelists during London Shipping Week. And just to close, I thank you very much, and I hope to see you there.